Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, Special Counsel Jack Smith files a new indictment against former President Donald Trump for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Israel rescues a hostage from a tunnel in Gaza, but hope for a larger hostage and ceasefire deal remains dim. And an American journalist freed from Russian detention in the latest prisoner swap shares her harrowing experience and how she's adjusting to life back home.
Even when the darkest feelings and emotions took over sometimes, I knew the whole world was fighting for me.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Kathy and Paul Anderson, and Camilla and George Smith.
The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, fostering informed and engaged communities. More at kf.org.
And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The fallout from last month's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity continues. Special Counsel Jack Smith has filed a new indictment against former President Donald Trump in federal court. The charges against Mr. Trump remain the same, 4 counts related to alleged actions he took to stay in power after the 2020 election. To explain what the new indictment means, Carrie Johnson, justice correspondent for NPR, joins us. Carrie, it's always great to see you. So help us understand why Jack Smith thought that this new indictment, this revised indictment, was necessary.
The Supreme Court decision last month cut away a significant part of the special counsel's case against Donald Trump here in Washington, D.C. And the special counsel, Jack Smith, told the court today that he was responding to the Supreme Court's directives and basically tightening his case in some important respects against the former president to make it comply with the instructions the Supreme Court had given him.
So we've got this new 36-page superseding indictment and the original 45-page indictment. What are the biggest changes between the two, Carrie?
The single biggest change is that the Supreme Court last month told the special counsel that the president has a lot of power, a great deal of leeway when it comes to interactions with the Justice Department. And so Jack Smith has removed a bunch of allegations from this indictment that initially charged Trump with leaning on Justice Department officials to go along with bogus claims of voter fraud and election fraud and try to convince states to do the same thing. Now, all of that is out of the indictment, as is one of the co-conspirators, a man we believe to be Jeffrey Clark, who was elevated by Donald Trump inside the Justice Department shortly before the events of January 6, 2021, and a man who appeared to have been on board with Trump's strategy about the election. All of that is now gone. And then later in the indictment, there's more language that describes Trump as acting as a person seeking office, a candidate, as opposed to a president using the formal powers of the presidency. That, too, is in line with what the Supreme Court had to say.
So what's next for this case? How might the judge in this case, Judge Tanya Chutkan, how might she receive this?
The judge has already asked both sides to confer and present her with a plan to how to go forward by Friday. We may have some more details later in the week. The Justice Department says it doesn't demand that Donald Trump be in court in D.C. in person to respond to these new charges, so he can just do that through his lawyers. And then, Jeff, the big question is the November election. If Trump prevails, he's fully in line to order the Justice Department to drop this case against him, and that would likely be legal. under the things the Supreme Court has said a president can do while in office. If Trump does not win in November, then all this legal wrangling becomes much more important. One of the key questions moving forward is how quickly can a trial of Donald Trump go forward, and will the special counsel add some new defendants? Some of these co-conspirators, alleged co-conspirators, people like Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, and others. These were lawyers who were working in their private capacity at the time to help Donald Trump cling to power.
Well, in the minute we have left, Carrie, the special counsel and his team, they've been busy because just yesterday they appealed the ruling tossing out the classified documents case. How does the move today fit within the overall landscape of the special counsel's work?
Well, we had heard all along that the special counsel team intended to keep working through the election, and it's been all systems go from Jack Smith along those lines. You know, Judge Eileen Cannon, the judge in Florida who was appointed to the bench by Trump, had dismissed that classified documents and obstruction case against him. Prosecutors say Cannon was wrong about the law. For 150 years, the Justice Department has selected special prosecutors in this way or ways like this, and that higher courts should reinstate that case against Trump. That, too, is going to putter along through the election. We may find out a lot more about that case and whether it gets revived early next year as well.
NPR's Carrie Johnson. Carrie, our deep thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jeff.
We start the day's other headlines in the Middle East. After 326 days in captivity, a hostage was found in the Hamas tunnels underneath Gaza and brought to safety by the Israeli military. Kayed Farhan al-Qadi is the 8th hostage to be rescued from Gaza, but dozens more wait to be freed in a potential ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Stephanie Tsai has the story.
The Soroka Medical Center is an unlikely scene for a race. But a helicopter carrying a rescued hostage from Hamas's October 7th attack had landed outside, and the family of Kayed Farhan al-Qadi had no time to waste.
Can't express my feelings. I hope my mother will be happier than us. We prayed for him. My mother prayed for him. Her prayer reached the sky.
Al-Qadi is part of the Arab Bedouin minority in Israel and was working in a kibbutz when Hamas attacked. He has a large family, including 2 wives and 11 children.
We cannot go into many details of this special operation, but I can share that Israeli commandos rescued Kayed Farhan al-Qadi from an underground tunnel following accurate intelligence.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to al-Qadi over the phone.
You really did a holy work you did. There are other people waiting.
I want you to know that we do not forget anyone, just as we did not forget you. We are committed to returning everyone without exception.
Israeli officials say 108 hostages are still held in Gaza, but more than 40 of those are thought to be dead. Hostage families are among the many urging Israel and Hamas to reach a ceasefire deal, but negotiations have stretched on for months without public progress. Meanwhile, Israel has continued its ground and air attacks on Gaza. The Palestinian death toll has reached 40,000 over the course of the war. Another 18 were killed overnight and today, according to officials in Gaza. Early this morning, a missile killed 6 members of the same family in Khan Yunis.
People were sleeping. Everyone woke up to the sound of the explosion. I was the first to arrive here. The father, mother, and children, we took them all out of here in body parts.
The eyewitnesses to horror growing in number, all while threats of expanded violence directed at Israel loom. Iran, still reeling over the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, has yet to exact revenge, but officials have reiterated it's coming. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
Also today, Russia launched a new wave of attacks across multiple regions in Ukraine. At least 5 people were killed. The latest missile and drone strikes come after Moscow hit Ukraine's power grid in its largest air attack of the war yet. Meantime, Ukraine says it's taken nearly 500 square miles of Russia's Kursk region and captured more Russian troops since that surprise incursion started 3 weeks ago. As fighting there intensifies, so do concerns about a potential nuclear incident. Today, the chief of the UN's nuclear watchdog visited the region's power plant, which he said is speckled with traces of drone attacks.
Pointing fingers is something that I, as Director General of the IAEA, must take extremely seriously. But it is obvious that you cannot separate what we have seen here from the recent military activity that we have seen.
He warns the plant is especially vulnerable to attack because it has no protective dome. Any such strike, he says, would have serious consequences. To the race for the White House now, Vice President Kamala Harris has been off the trail so far this week, but she's keeping up her presence on the airwaves.
I know what home ownership means, and sadly right now it is out of reach.
In a new ad, the Harris campaign highlights her plan to build 3 million new homes over 4 years to address rising housing prices. At a rally in Michigan today focused on the economy, Republican vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance took aim at Harris's record.
Americans can't afford groceries because of your leadership, Kamala. Young people can't afford homes because of the policies that you have enacted as vice president.
Meantime, the Trump campaign says that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is joining Donald Trump's presidential transition team after dropping out of the race this past Friday. Former presidential candidate and one-time Democrat Tulsi Gabbard will also serve as an honorary co-chair. Separately, more than 200 former Republican staffers have signed an open letter endorsing Harris over Trump. She and her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, will be sitting down with CNN for their first joint interview on Thursday evening. Harris has faced some criticism for not making herself more available to the press since Joe Biden dropped out of the race in July and endorsed her. Large parts of the country are sizzling in a late summer heat wave, with humidity pushing so-called feels-like temperatures into the triple digits in some areas. More than 70 million people were under some form of heat alert today. Residents of the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic were most directly affected. That has disrupted the first week of school in Detroit and Philadelphia, where students were sent home early today. Forecasts say the Midwest will cool down tomorrow, but the heat will linger on the East Coast for several more days. 2 workers were killed and a third was injured after an explosion at a Delta Airlines maintenance facility in Atlanta early this morning. Emergency crews were seen at the hangar near Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Local media have reported that a tire on a plane exploded. Delta released a statement offering condolences to the families, but provided few details about what happened. The airline says it's working with local officials to investigate the incident. Health authorities in New Hampshire say 1 person has died after testing positive for the Eastern equine encephalitis virus. It was the first reported infection in the state in a decade. The mosquito-borne virus can result in death or severe mental and physical disabilities. There are no antiviral treatments or vaccines. Several Massachusetts towns have urged people to stay indoors at night because of encephalitis concerns. On Wall Street, stocks eked out tiny gains across the board today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average inched up to another record close, adding just 10 points. The Nasdaq rose 2, tacking on 29 points, and the S&P also climbed just slightly higher on the day. And the great wait is over. With those words, the British pop group Oasis announced a reunion tour set for next year. It comes after more than a decade of feuding between the band's 2 brothers, Liam and Noel Gallagher. Songs like Wonderwall and Don't Look Back in Anger made Oasis one of the superstar acts of the 90s. They were compared to the Beatles, yes, the Beatles, and topped the pop charts, but their offstage drama often overshadowed their musical triumphs. The band has announced a 14-date tour across the UK and Ireland next summer. Still to come on the NewsHour, legal fights brew over states' new voting rules that could influence the outcome of this year's elections. A judge's ruling places 500,000 undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens in limbo. And a look at the extra hurdles people with disabilities face amid a national housing shortage.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
As we wind our way to the November elections, some key states are still debating and battling over brand new election rule changes. As our Lisa Desjardins explains, in some prominent cases, these are Republican-led and pushed by former President Donald Trump himself.
In just the past few weeks, the Georgia Election Board has passed changes that could affect this year's election. Among them, local officials could launch an investigation after results are in, and each local official could demand to examine all election documents, presumably including each ballot. If there's a discrepancy in ballot and voter counts, no vote from such a precinct would count. Former President Donald Trump has recently praised by name the 3 board members who passed those rules as fighting for honesty and victory. This week, the national and state Democratic parties filed a lawsuit citing current Georgia law and writing, election officials are free to voice concerns at the time of certification, but they may not point to those election irregularities or anything else as a basis for delaying certification or denying it entirely. To look at this and voting law changes in other states, I'm joined by Jessica Huseman of VoteBeat. Jessica, let's start right there in Georgia, obviously a hotly contested state. We see Vice President Harris there this week. What do we know about what Georgia election law says about certification, and can these rules stand?
I have a really difficult time seeing how they could, but I'm not an attorney. The law in Georgia does say that local boards shall certify the election by a given date. It does not give them any room to not do that and essentially accepts it as a predetermined conclusion. So I think that the law in Georgia is very clear as to what they need to do. And if they behave accordingly, then they will do the same thing they did last year.
Now, this comes from a newly configured election board. Georgia legislature changed the law to change this board. No longer sitting on this board is the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, someone who our viewers might remember was on that phone call with former President Trump, who wanted him to find some votes. Raffensperger refused. Now, Raffensperger has called out what he sees happening on the election board, saying it's a mess and saying it's misguided attempts by the state election board will delay election results and undermine chain of custody safeguards. Jessica, we are just 69 days away from this election. I know you're saying what the law looks like, but can the courts actually move through this quickly enough, or is it possible that there will be confusion about this on Election Day?
There's certainly a possibility that they could move quickly enough, right? Courts tend to move very quickly ahead of elections because they don't want to affect things too close to the day of the election. But the amount of time that courts consider too close is getting shorter and shorter and shorter every year. And so, yes, there could definitely be some confusion here. I think that if it gets even into the middle of September, we're going to start seeing some antsy feelings on the part of Georgia Democrats, especially. But ultimately, the courts do have it in their power to fix this.
If this is allowed to stay in place close to or right at Election Day, do you think any of these counties are ready to use these kinds of powers, and exactly for what?
You know, I'm sure that they are. I think that there are a lot of very red counties across the country that have been sort of playing with the idea of refusing to certify local election results. But in the past, that has not been successful, basically anywhere that it's been tried. And I don't see why it would be different in Georgia. Local boards are under a lot of pressure to certify from the people who live in the community. You can only certify your own election. And so if you choose not to certify your local results, that means you're preventing local candidates from taking office. And any of those people could sue. That's what's happened in the past when counties across the country have tried to do this. And I think that there probably will be a few counties in Georgia that push their luck here, but probably reverse course very quickly.
Do you have a sense of how much of this, for the election board members who really haven't spoken out too much outside of their meetings, how much of this is about their concerns over election security? How much of this could be what we hear from Donald Trump, trying to set up a scenario where there's doubt if he loses?
It's hard to say. I think that the Republican Party has gone all in with Donald Trump on these claims of voter fraud and non-citizen voting and bloated voter rolls, none of which are true. But because they've thrown themselves so far in line behind him, it's hard to say whether or not this is something they actually believe or if this is a party line. At the end of the day, I'm not sure that it makes much of a difference. This is a political determination that's definitely going to impact the efficacy of a vote.
And you mentioned those questions about non-citizens voting, and we know just this week or in the past week, the Supreme Court has ruled in on the Arizona law and given Arizona Republicans a sort of partial victory, saying that they can enforce some of the Arizona election law, which basically would mean, if I have this right, that people without an ID at the ballot box would have to fill out a special federal form to vote in the presidential election. That's something that a lot of Republicans are saying was a victory for them. Do you think that's going to make a difference at the polls or not in November?
It's hard to say. Past examples of voters having to fill out forms at polls do not suggest necessarily that voters will be tremendously dissuaded from voting as a result of that. So, for example, in Texas, if you do not have an ID, you have to fill out what's called a reasonable impediment declaration here. That does not seem to have been a barrier in recent elections. And so if this is implemented well by local election officials, it should be pretty seamless.
The right often raises this idea that perhaps there are too many people voting. We know there are not many instances of voter fraud. But on the left, the concern is sometimes about too few and purging voter rolls. Texas just announced that there's been about 1 million purged as part of its regular countywide purging of voter rolls for those who are deceased, et cetera. Is there anything this year to be concerned about, or is that standard procedure?
So removing people from the voter roll is very well controlled. There's federal laws that dictate when and how someone can be removed from the voter roll and what kind of notice they have to give to the people who they're attempting to remove. And so none of those things have changed in the last few years. That federal law has remained the same. And we're actually currently within the window that those federal laws allow, such that no one can be removed from the rolls at this point from now until the election. So if you're on the rolls now, you're going to stay on the rolls through to the end of the election. That will not change. But I think it's important for people to know that there is a universe of federal law that does apply to this, that dictates when someone is made inactive and how long they must be inactive and how much notice they need to be given in the mail in order to remove that person from the voter roll. So this is not an overnight process, and it's a process very tightly controlled.
Jessica Huseman, a very clear look at some big concerns. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
A federal judge in Texas has temporarily blocked a Biden administration program that could offer legal status to undocumented immigrants who are married to U.S. citizens. Our White House correspondent, Laura Barone Lopez, has been covering all of this. Laura, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So who is behind this lawsuit, and how is the Biden White House responding to all of this?
So it's important to note this is a lawsuit not based on merits, but a pause as litigation plays out. And the lawsuit was filed by 16 Republican-led states, attorneys general, led by Ken Paxton of Texas. And he called this Biden's unconstitutional scheme would have rewarded more than 1 million illegal aliens with the opportunity for citizenship after breaking our country's laws and incentivized countless more. And these Republican-led states claim that the administration's actions would cause financial harm to their states because they would have to pay for services like education, healthcare, driver's licenses for these undocumented migrants. And these states were assisted by America First Legal, which is founded by Stephen Miller, longtime Trump advisor, architect of many of his immigration policies. He was a part of this lawsuit. Now, the administration says that they are going to defend this policy known as the Keeping Families Together policy. And in a statement today, President Biden said, "Nothing I did changed the requirements people have to meet to adjust their status under immigration law. All I did was make it possible for these longtime residents to file the paperwork here together with their families, meaning that they would not have to leave the country for years on end in order to get this legal status.
So what does this pause now mean for the people who would have benefited from this program?
The people that would have benefited were undocumented spouses of married to U.S. citizens who meet clear parameters, like living in the United States for more than 10 years and had no felonies. They would have qualified for parole in place, which is a long-time program offered by the U.S. without having to leave. And based on the administration's estimates of who would have been eligible, those impacted are going to be some 500,000 undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens will be impacted by this court ruling, and 50,000 children under the age of 21 who have a U.S. citizen step-parent. Now, I spoke to Todd Schulte of Forward U.S. He's the president of that pro-immigration immigrant rights group, and he said that this is going to have a significant impact and whiplash for these families.
For people who have put in an application and have not heard, people who paid a fee, worked with an attorney, and honestly waited decades. That's on hold right now, and that is devastating for their families. I talked to someone who came during the Reagan administration, and this was her best chance to have a little bit more certainty in her life.
So again, groups like his are going to be fighting this, but they're very concerned for what this means for these undocumented spouses.
In the meantime, can those undocumented immigrants who are eligible for this program, can they still apply?
So they can still apply, but things could potentially change. What the Department of Homeland Security said today, Jeff, was that when it comes to the application process, people can continue to accept applications, but pending or new applications that have been submitted since this ruling will not be approved. They will basically be in limbo. And then the parole applications that were already approved will not be affected.
So where does this case, this litigation, where does it go next?
So this pause right now by the judge puts the program on hold for at least 14 days, but it could be extended. And right now, immigration lawyers, as well as the administration, are fighting to try to make sure that this pause is stopped after 14 days and that ultimately the program can proceed as litigation continues. But again, it creates a lot of fear, depression, and anxiety for undocumented migrants like Fode Toure, who's been in the country. I spoke to him today. He's been in the country for more than 20 years. He said that when he heard the news, he was playing with his one-year-old son, that it drove his wife to tears. And his ultimate message is that this is not just targeting undocumented migrants like himself who work in the U.S. and who have created a life here, but all of his family members who are U.S. citizens, his wife, his mother. And he said that Texas is targeting not just one undocumented migrant, but 5 United States citizens with their ruling.
Laura Barone-Lopez. Laura, thank you.
Thank you.
Earlier this month, an extraordinary prisoner swap with Russia brought 3 Americans home. Among them was Russian-American journalist Alsu Kurmasheva, who was sentenced to 6.5 years on charges of spreading false information about the Russian army. That was Alsu holding her daughters and husband tight, a tearful, joyous reunion. Today, she joins me here with her husband, Pavel Butorin. Alsu and Pavel, welcome to the NewsHour. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Your homecoming, Alsu, that moment where you were embracing your loved ones after nearly a year being separated from them, what was that like?
I've lived the happiest moments of my life. It was exactly as I was dreaming of for months and months when I was in prison. I actually had the same dream, how I'll be greeting them and hugging them several times. So it was exactly the dream was coming true.
How has this past month for you readjusting to freedom and reclaiming your life as you knew it?
It's been extraordinary. My doors are finally open. After more than 9 months of behind closed doors in a cell without a window, I finally see colors, I see trees, I see plants, I see people, I talk to them, I hug them. It's been amazing. It's been exhausting as I reveal so much the scale of the campaign which was going on my behalf, but positively exhausting. I'm happy of that.
Yeah, exhausting in the best way.
Yes.
Pavel, your family is whole again. Your daughters, Bibi and Miriam, how are they doing? And how are you doing?
Well, I'm finally a little bit more relaxed. After more than a year without Alsu, of which for more than 9 months she was held in a Russian prison cell, we are overjoyed to have Alsu back. This is going to be a process. She is adjusting to living in the free world again. We are helping her reprogram from a culture of fear and distrust to the free world where she can publish and say whatever she wants. She has the support of her family, of her friends, and of her colleagues.
When you were detained, Alsu, did you have any sense of the kind of advocacy work your husband was doing to secure your release?
I only believed and hoped that something like that might be happening, but I clearly didn't have a sense of the scale of the advocacy campaign. And there is a long list. I want to say thanks, and we're thankful forever to my colleagues at RFE. They were opening my doors here in DC, and this is how we worked together without me knowing what was happening, and actually all the efforts brought to a happy end. And of course, the tremendous support by the US government and the President Biden administration, but also members of Congress from Republicans and Democrats. I just learned it recently after my release that the effort was bipartisan. And there was a union, everybody united to bring me home as an American mother and American journalist, because that was clearly why I was detained and why I was arrested, for being an American journalist.
What did you experience while you were detained?
It was days, endless days, meaningless days of constant humiliation and intimidation in small things. I haven't witnessed physical violence in the cell I was kept in, but it's moral pressure and continuous humiliation was on the way. And people didn't realize even that it's not the life to live in. It's overwhelmed fear of each other, of your own thoughts, of what you hear on TV. The society has been put on the survival mode. That's what I sensed.
You have 3 colleagues who are still being detained. What's your message to them?
Well, my today's celebrations are bittersweet because of that. I can't stop thinking about them because I know what they and their families are going through right now. I can sense it, and I want to tell them you are in our thoughts and prayers, and we will do everything to release you and to bring that moment of you reuniting with your families.
One of them is Vlad Yosipenko. He was detained in Russia-occupied Crimea. And I've met his wife and his daughter, and no family should go through this. Journalists do not deserve to be detained or imprisoned. We know that he has done nothing wrong. We won't stop our fight for his freedom.
There are those who say, while it's wonderful you're home, that the U.S. can't keep doing these deals where the U.S. exchanges terrorists and criminals for reporters and dissidents, that it only encourages the likes of a Vladimir Putin and leads to more unjust detainments in despotic nations. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm perhaps the wrong person to ask, because all I wanted was to get also back to her family. I think in this trade, the U.S. government and its allies showed that the free world places a higher value on human life, even if it means exchanging real criminals and spies for innocent Americans. I know that it's a complicated moral dilemma, but I think we in the free world need to have that moral courage to make these efforts.
And after the trade, I realized that the choice, the decision which was made by the Western governments and the United States government was a difficult one, and I really appreciate that.
You flew home with Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. Did you share stories? Did you talk? What was that like?
We did talk a lot. We shared stories, and actually, Pavel said he really enjoyed listening to us.
They picked up some prison jargon there, so which was kind of interesting. But I had no idea about any of those words.
Though we were all wrongfully detained and unjustly held in prison in Russia, our stories were very different. Women prisons are very different in Russia, and we were all kept in different conditions. It was interesting to share those stories.
What was important for us is to be able to somehow communicate with Elsa. Our communication was quite limited, but every opportunity we had, we tried to communicate it to her that the world stood by her side, by our family, and we knew that she was innocent.
And that kept me going always, even when the darkest feelings and emotions took over sometimes. I knew the whole world was fighting for me, my colleagues and human rights organizations and journalists, everybody was fighting for me, and that kept me going.
And the way we tried to keep her connected to the outside world was, I think at some point we even snuck in the lyrics of Taylor Swift songs to Elsa, so that she, kept up with culture.
Yeah, but the release of the new album was like, I was in prison already, so I haven't heard the songs, but I was kind of fantasizing how they might sound, and I heard them actually when I came home.
Yeah. Well, Pavel, now that you mentioned it, you were on this program some weeks ago and spoke to my colleague Nick Schifrin and said that you and your daughter were supposed to be attending a Taylor Swift concert the night that Alsu came home. Were you able to reschedule that concert?
Not yet. We're working on it, but again, what were the odds? This is something that we had planned for a year. I bought those tickets in July 2023, a year ahead of time.
Before I was arrested.
Yeah, before she was arrested. So we were hoping. I had 4 tickets actually, 4 VIP tickets. And Taylor Swift is not. They're not just fans of Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is their world. It's a world that gave them solace and comfort during those darkest times. And the girls made, I think, 70 friendship bracelets for their show. Wow. They played, Taylor's songs on their guitars every day. They watched those live streams of surprise songs from the Eras tour. Unfortunately, those dreams were shattered, and it was a trade, but it was worth it, obviously. Yeah. But we're not losing hope. We're hoping to see Taylor this year.
Well, we are so glad that this story has a happy ending. Alsu Kurmasheva, Pavel Bitorin, thanks so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us for a look at how some companies are scaling back diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives after conservative backlash. But first, to the nation's affordable housing shortage. Millions of Americans are priced out of homes and apartments, and for people with disabilities, finding an accessible place they can afford can be even more challenging. Judy Woodruff reports as part of our series, Disability Reframed.
34-year-old Jensen Caraballo considered himself lucky when he moved into this apartment more than a decade ago. After searching for 2 years, he found a one-bedroom in Rochester, New York, where he lives with 24/7 care from in-home attendants like Luis.
I'll be honest, I settled for less. I needed a 2-bedroom apartment that was affordable and accessible. And this place was not it. But it was the only way that I should live independently. So I settled for less.
Caraballo has spinal muscular atrophy, a neuromuscular disability, and has used a wheelchair since he was a child. At 15 years old, he moved into a nursing home.
I remember feeling neglected, living in a nursing home as a teenager was very challenging and honestly traumatic. I felt stripped of my autonomy.
But his apartment is far from ideal. The bathroom is too small for him to close the door, and almost everything in his kitchen is inaccessible. You have to back in order to open the refrigerator, right?
Yes.
And then what about on the sink?
I have no access.
He says he moved in because there were no other options in his budget. Caraballo receives Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, a monthly benefit program many people with disabilities rely on. He uses the SSI payment and a housing voucher to help cover his rent, but says it isn't enough to pay for the apartment and all of his other monthly expenses.
Sometimes there's a bill that doesn't get paid. Sometimes I'm in the negative in my bank account. I ask for family and friends to chip in if they are able to. That takes a lot out of me to have to ask for help. This is my story, but it's not just my story. It's an issue that has impacted the disability community for a very long time.
More than 4 million people with disabilities who receive SSI can't afford rent in any U.S. housing market. The maximum SSI payment for one person is about $950 a month. It is the sole source of income for many who receive it, and it's used to pay for everything from housing to food and transportation. Even in America's cheapest rental market, Dallas County, Missouri, rent for a one-bedroom would require 64% of a monthly SSI payment.
We've set up a situation where millions of people with disabilities can't afford to live anywhere in the United States.
Erin Nguyen Neff is a staff attorney at the Disability Rights, Education, and Defense Fund and represents people in court cases involving housing discrimination. Nguyen Neff says even when people with disabilities do find affordable housing, ensuring their space is accessible can be daunting.
A person with a disability might need a home health aide to live in with them. This could technically be a violation of your lease. There might be some limitation on how many people can be in that apartment and for what period of time. Another classic example is having basic modifications to your home, like having bars in the bathroom. So if you have a mobility disability, it's easier for you to use a shower, to use a toilet.
In 1988, former President Ronald Reagan signed an extension of the Fair Housing Act to prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. But Nguyen Neff says all too often, landlords ignore tenants with disabilities or deny requests for reasonable accommodation. Last year, more than half of all housing complaints filed nationwide were disability-related. Nguyen Neff says that reality and a shortage of in-home support services like direct care workers gives some people with disabilities no option but to live in nursing homes or other institutions.
If we can make some changes to our society, provide some more support and services, a person with a disability can live independently and can do a lot of the same things people without disabilities can.
Just off a light rail station stop in San Jose, California, a new apartment building offers an alternative. The Kelsey Ayer Station is home to people with and without disabilities across various income levels.
Whether you're a person with disabilities who SSI is your sole source of income and you have almost no money to pay rent, or you're middle income making $100,000 a year, that this community meets that diverse level of affordability.
Michaela Connery is co-founder and CEO of the Kelsey, the nonprofit that co-developed the building. She started it with her cousin, Kelsey, who had multiple disabilities and was an advocate for inclusion. She says what makes the building unique is its focus on fostering community with resident outings and monthly meetings led by so-called inclusion concierges who connect residents to services.
From, I need a transit pass, how do I get there, to, I'm in a crisis and I need my service and case manager to all come together and help me get through this crisis, to, I'm looking for a social group to be involved in that's around the arts. Do you have any suggestions?
And from the beginning, people with and without disabilities took part in workshops to decide what the building's design and services should look like, including 33-year-old Isaac Haney Owens, who has autism. He showed us around the Kelsey Sensory Garden.
It gives people a place to be able to decompress if they need to get away from the stimulation that's going on in the building. We want to show the world that people with and without disabilities can live together and not be separated from each other when it comes to housing.
25% of the building's units are reserved for people with disabilities. They include kitchens and bathrooms with removable cabinets for wheelchair users and dimmable lighting for people with light sensitivity. Floors are coded by number, color, and symbol to help with wayfinding. 39-year-old Trevor Luckin moved to the Kelsey in June. He loves being in the kitchen and dreams of starting his own cooking show.
I put the butter in and then put the egg in after, and then I take my bagel seasoning right on top.
Luckin has Down syndrome and says he enjoys using the building's gym and having his own space.
Having your own room where you can do what you want to do, what does that mean to you?
It's more comfortable. I just like it because I can get my own privacy.
The building project was financed with a combination of government funding, philanthropy, low-income tax credits, and loans. Connery says she hopes to expand the housing model to more states, but the biggest challenge is funding.
Having that either philanthropic or public subsidy to bring into these is crucial to make sure you serve the deepest need. Because affordability is so critical, and having units available for folks with disabilities who have no familial support and no other funding available, if we only wanted to serve people who were middle and high income, then maybe you could explore a for-profit model.
And attorney Nguyen Neff says making housing affordable and accessible nationwide starts with policy.
Having adequate rent regulation or rent control to help keep rents regulated and low for people with disabilities and for low-income people, increasing funding so that people with disabilities have greater access to housing, but also changing the way we look at housing to remove the profit motive and center the people living there.
Back in Rochester, Jensen Caraballo says ultimately, changing the status quo around housing starts with shifting how others think about disability.
I think we often feel shame and embarrassment when it comes to disability. There's this narrative that you're better off dead than disabled. And we have to change that. Disability is a natural and normal thing. It's a part of life, and it can affect any of us at any time.
He says he's hopeful that he will one day find a new place he can call home. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Rochester, New York.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI programs, are under attack by conservative lawmakers and activists. From college campuses to corporate America, the fear of legal liability and political backlash is leading some to backtrack or rebrand their diversity initiatives. In the last few weeks, there have been a number of high-profile companies announcing changes. The latest, home improvement retailer Lowe's. That follows similar moves by Harley-Davidson, John Deere, and the maker of Jack Daniel's whiskey. For a closer look, we're joined by Simone Foxman, who's covering all of this for Bloomberg News. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with a definition of what DEI is. How do DEI efforts differ from long-standing efforts to diversify and increase the talent pool at the workplace?
Well, in the workplace, people who oversee DEI efforts, some of them call them a variety of EDI, D&I, they just mean to diversify the workplace. And exactly what that means is different from company to company. It's different from DEI professional to DEI professional, from one CEO to another. And that's kind of part of why DEI as an acronym has become this charged, very controversial term recently.
And what's driving the backlash?
Well, part of it is this woke, anti-woke culture war idea. A lot of these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs were really ramped up, if not put into place to begin with, after the murder of George Floyd back in 2020. So companies made hundreds of billions of dollars worth of commitment to say, we want more diverse people in our workforce, and we want to help diverse communities, chiefly people of color. That all sort of started to change around the time we saw that backlash against ESG, environmental, social, and governance. It's one of these buzzwords that really has to do with a certain form of investing, but has become this culture war topic. So the S is the DEI piece, and that's really what's come under fire recently, especially since the Supreme Court rolled back affirmative action in 2023.
So as we mentioned, Lowe's joins Tractor Supply, Harley-Davidson, the maker of Jack Daniel's whiskey, and paring back their DEI programs. What's the through line? Why are these companies in particular scaling back?
So these companies have all been targeted by a social media influencer by the name of Robbie Starbuck. And unlike other conservative activists, Robbie Starbuck, he's not a lawyer. He's just a guy online who is bringing attention to what he calls woke policies at retailers or at companies that have a lot of consumer interest, where he believes those consumers don't want the companies to be adopting those policies. For example, if you go out into middle America and very rural communities, you're likely to find a higher number of more conservative people that might not be as interested in seeing trans workers at Tractor Supply, say, being provided with health care. So he's essentially trying to blend the potential conservative impulses of certain groups of people with what their corporate policies are doing and say, hey, there's a disconnect here. And he's been extremely effective. These couple campaigns have just come in the last 2 months since, actually 3 months since early June. So we've seen a lot of movement on the corporate front. One of the things I think we have to ask ourselves, though, is whether or not these companies were ever really as committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, the same efforts they're rolling back now, as they said there were, no matter what the headlines were, the press releases said, 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, looking at the data, white men still control about 60% of the top leadership roles, while making up about 30% of the U.S. workforce. That's according to federal workplace data. So that raises two questions. One, is the concern among these conservative activists misplaced? But the question I'll put to you is, are these DEI initiatives actually working?
We've seen some very limited movements with respect to people of color and women in positions of senior leadership. But actually, white women have been the key beneficiaries of DEI policies to date. When we talk about whether or not this has filtered down to all communities of color, women of color perhaps, I think it's harder to see the dramatic movement. I think the hope was, especially with the policies that came into place after the murder of George Floyd, actually, if we just all really put all our efforts into trying to diversify our workforces, we'll see more movement than we have. We have seen some movement. The numbers are really small. I think it's about 9% of senior leadership roles are now held by by Black people, where they make up 14% of the population. But it's small. It's like 7 to 9%, something like that.
Setting aside the political aspect of all of this and the culture war aspect of all of this, there are advocates for diversity who say that you can make a good business case for it, that having a workplace that has a diversity of views in the room usually makes for better business.
That's something, frankly, even, I guess, opponents of DEI, some of them do say that. I think there's really three groups of people, right? There are the really pro-DEI folks who are pushing some of these policies, often special programs for people of color or women to help them get ahead in ways they haven't before. There is a middle group, I think, that says, well, we respect the idea of diversity in our boardroom, in our workplace, but we don't think those policies are necessary. And then you probably have a group of people who say, well, we're white men or we're white people and we want to hold on to the power that we have in this society, and that's a different group of people. Frankly, no one is, I think there's some crossover between the two groups, the two first groups I mentioned, and no one's really kind of speaking to the intersection of them, which is why activists on all sides are so loud and they're really dominating the conversation.
Simone Foxman, equity reporter for Bloomberg News. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And there is much more online, including a report on how Oklahoma schools are incorporating the Bible into lesson plans because of a mandate from top education officials there. That's at pbs.org/newshour. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us. Have a good night.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.